Hey all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani.
And I'm Sam.
Sorry, I was reading and trying to talk at the same time, and it did not work out in my favor. So, we are doing a different type of episode today. There's not going to be a specific person we're talking about, but I think it's an important topic.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
So, according to nativehope.org, the red hand is a symbol of missing and murdered Indigenous women, or MMIW movement. It symbolizes those voices not heard, those who cannot speak for themselves. Since colonization of the Americas, Indigenous peoples have been persecuted and pushed out of their lands. Violence is not new. Though times have changed and people claimed to have evolved from witch hunts and religious wars, violence remains. According to NativeWomensWilderness.org, quote, as of 2016, the National Crime Information Center has reported 5,712 cases of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls. Strikingly, the U.S. Department of Justice Missing Persons Database has only reported 116 cases.
Whoa.
The majority of these murders are committed by non-Native people on Native-owned land. The lack of communication combined with jurisdictional issues between state, local, federal, and tribal law enforcement make it nearly impossible to begin the investigative process, end quote.
I thought that was your own quote.
No, that is not. That is not my quote.
That is absolutely just devastating.
Yeah, horrifying is a good word.
What a great topic to be discussing, though.
Yeah, I
I
think so.
feel like I've heard bits and pieces of the rumors that there's all these missing women and not really a lot of attention paid or resources offered. But to discuss it, I think is going to be really very important for us.
I think so.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Interior, Indian Affairs states, quote, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, non-Hispanic American Indian and Alaskan Native females experienced the second highest rate of homicide in 2020. Additionally, in 2020, homicide was in the top 10 leading causes of death for AI/AN females aged 1 to 45. More than 2 in 5 non-Hispanic AI/AN women, it's 43.7%, were raped in their lifetime, end quote.
Almost half. Those are not good odds.
No, they're not. Nationally, February 14th is MMIW National Day of Action and Awareness, a day that women's memorial marches occur around the country, the largest of which is in Vancouver, British Columbia, actually. May 5th is the official MMIW Day and is celebrated across the U.S. and Canada, with people wearing red attending marches, rallies, bike rides, and fundraisers. The missing listed on the U.S. Department of Interior Indian Affairs include, so we're going to go through a long list of women, and this is before we even get into the actual episode.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Michelle Elbow Shield, last known location, Rapid City, South Carolina, September of 2023. Brown hair and eyes, last seen wearing a blue sweater and black jeans. Rita Papapke, last known location, Tama, on January 16th, 2015. She's 5'4", brown hair and eyes. Diane Medicine Horse was last seen on the Crow Agency Crow Indian Reservation in Montana. Frida Noingshagun went missing on October 18th, 2016 from Kenneck, Washington, after leaving a Walmart. Ashley Loring, heavy runner, last seen on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation in Browning, Montana. Tina Whitehawk went missing on December 26, 2021, last seen in Anderson, California. Shakai Harding went missing on July 23, 2019, last seen at the Tumbleweed Runaway Center in Billings, Montana. There's a homicide victim. Helen Doe remains were discovered on May 14, 1991, after two semi-trucks collided on I-5 north of Kalama, Washington. The collision resulted in a fire, killing both occupants of one of the semi-trucks. Helen Doe was severely burned and not identified. Kendra Nicole Botello went missing on July 5th, 2022, last seen in Enid, Oklahoma. Homicide victim Rise Pocan went missing on August 10th, 1989, and her remains were found September 2nd, 1989, in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin. Neva Kingburn went missing in October of 2021. I can talk. From Bemidji, she is 5'5" and 120 pounds.
This list is like, you're probably just breaking the surface of it.
Barely.
Yeah.
Barely.
It's just astonishing to me that there's not, like, all of these names that you keep saying. I'm like, what happened to them? Like, I just
We don't know
instantly like, what?
where they
Who's
go.
on it?
Yeah.
Like, where did these people go?
So these are just some of the names of those who have fallen victim to the enormously horrible statistics. They represent a mere blip overall injustice that face the Indigenous peoples. I will never be able to truly convey everything on the topic, but we can try and keep a light shining on it. By keeping the stories in the forefront as a true crime podcast, we'd be remiss if we simply avoided the topic.
That's very well said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now we can get into the actual episode that I'll be discussing. And the hope is that, we'll be doing multiple of these throughout the year. Most of them are based off of the books and research done by Indigenous women. And so this one will be based off of the book Highway of Tears by Jessica McDiarmid, I believe is how you say her last name. And it was hard because I read her book and then you try to do other like sourcing of information, and it's either the exact same of what's in the book or there's nothing.
Because
And
it's
so,
from her head.
yeah. And she's the one that did out most of the research. And I'm like, well, are all these websites getting this from her book?
Yeah.
Because this feels almost identical. So it was hard to kind of get outside information.
Uh-huh.
But she was the one that went and did like boots on the ground type of research.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a wonderful book. I only touch the surface of it. I don't even get into everything that she writes. Obviously, I'm not going to do, like a book report, but
Right.
we want to get the topic out there. So,
I mean, you could do a book report. You basically have just a condensed version.
yes. So again, the first of these installments will be discussing an area in British Columbia, Canada, actually known as the Highway of Tears. It is Highway 16 that moves from the Rockies through the northwest of British Columbia and past Edmonton. Again, these are summarized. Many of them are coming from that book I just talked about, and it's describing the losses of the First Nations peoples for the most part.
What a sad name for a highway.
I know, Highway of Tears. So they nicknamed that because of the losses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
It's
I know.
it's a little daunting.
Well, yeah, and it definitely reminds me of the Trail of Tears. I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
which is in the U.S. history that's horrible and all in itself, also about Indigenous peoples being forced,
Yeah.
and a lot of death in that as well. So we are going to start with Delphine Nicole. She was born in Smithers, British Columbia in February of 1975, 12 years after her parents' other children. So she was the baby.
Oops.
Yeah. She grew up on a hobby farm near the city, and when she was young, her parents split and Delphine went to live with her father. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1986, forcing Delphine to move in with mother and her new husband, Mickey Maggie, a man she didn't get along with. In 1989, she was sent to a rehabilitation center after being charged with theft, mischief, breaking and entering, and failure to comply. So there's kind of a theme in here that there's, maybe as a youth they went a little wayward and there might be some drug use. And I think that also, plays a part in why maybe these girls weren't looked into as heavily as
Yeah.
other women. I definitely think that there's a race element to it, at least at this time. The way that families talk about the response, it definitely feels like well, they probably just, ran away or left,
Right.
and which is a horrible sentiment, but
And I think if you were to think about it from the standpoint of the troubled youth of white girls,
mhm,
sure, they there are women who go missing in their teens that are white who are having issues with drugs and potentially theft. They might not have been prosecuted the same in the court system, so it doesn't appear like that they have such a troubled history.
mhm,
Or B, we still make a big fuss about it.
yeah,
Like, it doesn't matter. We don't a lot of times we don't even learn about, like, that aspect of who they were until, like, way down the road
mhm,
when the media finally, like, points it out, and you're like, "Oh, whoa, okay."
yeah,
But this is, like, the highlight. It's the reason why a lot of times I think police say, they probably just ran away."
yeah, yeah, I can understand that. Um, so Delphine bounced between youth facilities after this, but stayed in touch with family, finally returning home in May of 1990. Then in June of 1990, Judy had a surgery. Again, that's the mom, and had complications after which resulting in a hospital admission in Prince George, which was 4 hours from
Oh
home.
god.
Mhm. Delphine stayed with her uncle at this time, Frank. On June 13th, 15-year-old Delphine told her uncle she was going to hang out with friends in town. As the day wore into evening, she invited her friends to come home, but they didn't want to go, and so she called her uncle from a gas station and told him she was going to hitchhike home, which was pretty common at the
Mm,
time. When she didn't make it, she was reported missing to the RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who stated that she likely ran off. So from the jump, like they don't
right.
even know anything about her at this point. And the family's like, she said she was coming home
Yeah.
and she decided she just ran off.
And, like, it would make me furious too to know that my daughter was hitchhiking, which was probably of the time. Like,
Mhm.
I know my parents hitchhiked frequently back I mean, this isn't quite in the '70s, but still,
Yeah,
it's
this
of
is 90s,
yeah,
which is I
it's
feel like that sort of the end of hitchhiking
yeah,
times.
definitely, before the cell phone was invented.
Mhm.
Like, when you had to use your own signaling with your thumb up and,
Yeah.
like, I've got no one to text,
Yeah.
like, this is my text to you.
Mhm.
Um But I feel like that would have made it even more infuriating to
Mhm.
me when they're like, "Oh, she probably ran off." I'd be like, "No, she got into some person's car and they hurt her. They
Yeah.
took her.
Yeah.
Go find what car she got into."
Which is, I think, where the family standpoint,
Yeah.
is. So I can feel the frustration because even reading this, I was like, "Are you kidding me right
Yeah.
now?" I've never wanted to both read and throw a book all at the same time.
Oh, it would be so
Just
frustrating.
when you're just reading it, you're like, I can't believe that this is just like I know about it, but every time like it comes up, I just get
Yeah.
frustrated, especially now that I'm a mom,
Right.
I think it like you can feel it where you're like, well, what if that was my baby? I was like, I would be losing it.
Right. And it's like so it's just it's awful that a police force thinks that they know the daughter better than their own mother does or
Mhm.
their own uncle or their own sister or friends. Like I always tell patients in the hospital when they like have something to tell me about their family member, I'm always tell them, "You are going to advocate for your family
Mhm.
better than I ever will
Mhm.
because you know them. You know who they are, you know what they need. I don't. I know baseline, but like if you have opinions, I'm happy to hear them
Yeah.
because you're going to do it better than anyone else."
Yeah. So this left Delphine's sister, Mary, and friends to search for her.
Oh
So
my
family went
god.
out, I mean, immediately, and they did. And after learning she might have gone to a neighboring village, the girls drove there and knocked on every door in the village to try and find her.
Holy cow.
During this time, Mary says, quote, the cops never really showed a whole lot of interest. They obviously didn't really care, end quote. And this is a sentiment that rings through this
That's so
entire
sad.
thing. 4 months later, in October, the Interior News finally ran an article about Delphine's disappearance, in which an investigating officer was quoted saying, quote, "We have no indication of foul play. We are not considering that at the moment," end quote.
That's so infuriating.
Yeah, and that tells you exactly what they're
Yeah.
thinking,
It's like,
which makes
obviously you are not gonna have an indication of foul play because you haven't looked
you
for an
haven't
indication of foul play.
you haven't investigated.
Yeah,
You haven't done anything.
right. You have nothing.
Yeah.
You've boiled down that sentence to "we have nothing"
Mhm. And
to
we've done
make it,
nothing.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Rhonda, the founder of Missing Children Society of Canada, was called 2 years later in June of 1992 by Judy. Rhonda sent out Fred Mayle, a private investigator who retired and volunteered with this foundation. He made it to Smithers on April 5th, 1993. So years later, they're still looking.
That's so, like, yeah,
Frustrating,
it's so
heartbreaking.
frustrating.
I
At that
can't.
point, potentially, when you find her, she might not even know who she is anymore.
Mhm. While running down leads and rumors, Fred learned that Rhonda's cousin, Cecilia Nichol, was also missing.
Oh my god.
She too lived in Smithers, born in 1971. Cecilia took a bus with a friend headed towards Vancouver to visit her birth mother in August of 1983. She called her family back in Smithers days later to say she'd be back in a couple weeks, but was never seen again. And Fred decided Cecilia needed to be looked into as well. Neither women have been found.
Yeah. That's just, I can't even imagine being a private investigator and you're like looking into this disappearance of this woman, and then you find out that, oh, there's another woman in her family that's gone missing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my brain would explode.
Yeah. And this foundation, made by Rhonda, she had done other volunteer work, but realized that they didn't do boots on the ground type of stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
she started her own kind of offshoot in which they actually went into the cities and towns and tried to look for people and help run down
Right.
um, kind of the tips and stuff that came in so that it's not just the family, it's also somebody else. And a lot of the volunteers are retired police or private investigators, so they know how to do it.
I was gonna say, I wonder how much like pushback they get from local law enforcement.
It didn't say in the book, and several times it said that they actually went and talked with the police, and the police kind of gave their information,
Okay.
and that's how they started with their leads. So
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like they actually gave a whole lot of pushback, like, "Oh my God, why are you here?"
Yeah.
It's like,
Like,
"Fine, you're gonna do it. Here's the information," is what it sounded like.
see, that almost actually makes me even more nervous.
Yeah.
Like, it almost, I'm glad that the police are saying, "Here, take it," since we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
But that's why they're saying, "Here, take it," because I feel like on so many occasions I've heard stories of like a private detective or like a group of people trying to go in and do some form of like assistance in a case, and the police are like, "Get out of here.
Mhm.
You're ruining our investigation. You're messing with what we're trying to do. Get out of here."
Mhm.
Whereas here they're like, "Here it is.
Yeah.
Now we don't have to do it."
Yeah.
Like,
Well, they weren't doing it anyway, so
right.
at least somebody
Yeah, I
is.
know. I'm incredibly grateful for Rhonda.
Yeah. Ramona Wilson was born in Smithers, British Columbia on February 15th, 1978, the youngest of six. Her mother, Matilda, was a hard-working single mother. The family sounded tight-knit and loving. Ramona decided at 12 she wanted to become a psychologist, and after high school planned on going to the University of Victoria. Her best friend, Crystal, said of her, quote, "She was the kind of person that you couldn't not connect with," end quote.
Mm,
On Friday, June 10th, 1994, 16-year-old Ramona learned she got a summer job that she had applied for as a peer counselor with Smithers Community Services Association. The next day, Ramona left, going to meet Crystal at a dance in Hazleton, a town adjacent kind of to where they lived. And these are all pretty small
mhm.
towns. But she didn't show up, and Crystal sort of just figured that she had changed plans and went to Morristown to meet up with her boyfriend. Again, this is the time before cell phones, so she was like,
Right.
"Oh, she probably just went out with her man instead."
Yeah.
It wasn't until Monday that Crystal realized Ramona was missing. That day, she missed school. Then after school, Crystal called Ramona's work, learning that she was scheduled but hadn't shown up, which was unlike her. She didn't
Right.
miss work. She called Matilda to let her know that Ramona hadn't been at school and wasn't at work, and Matilda confirmed kind of those details, like, well, she hasn't been here either. I haven't seen her. And then Matilda went to the RCMP, and the RCMP said, give it time.
Of course they did.
That she'd likely return when she wanted to, essentially ignoring the family. Again, the family didn't wait. The whole family, including extended, searched around the town. They made phone calls. They got to work trying to find their Ramona.
Yeah, I would too. Oh my gosh. There'd be a flyer on every person's door in the surrounding 50-mile radius.
Yeah. It took 11 days for her disappearance to make the local newspaper. Police were also finally searching 11 days
11
behind.
days later.
It took another week for helicopters to be used to assist in the search. Almost a month later, on July 5th, the Missing Children's Society of Canada came to bolster the search.
Oh,
So they were informed. Again, this is Rhonda's agency.
yeah,
This in turn brought Delphine's name up again. So they were like, well, we still haven't found her.
right.
The society even offered up to a $10,000 reward for information on either woman. This, actually, I didn't write it down in my notes to talk about, but this came because family couldn't afford like a reward they had been trying to make. Did like fundraisers and stuff to try and make a reward. At the same time, around this time, a white woman did go missing, like another teenager, and the family put up something like 50,000,
Right.
and a national search went, and it went quick to find this girl,
Oh, yeah.
and nothing was ever spoken about Ramona. And so the society was like, this is ridiculous. And so even though they didn't normally provide money as support, they're like, we have to do
Right. We
something.
need some form of like motivation for
Mhm.
other places to start investigating
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
And so all they could afford was the 10,000, but they put up the 10,000
I
for it.
mean, that's pretty incredible.
But
That's,
a little ridiculous that
it's
at the same time,
asinine
yeah,
that,
another.
like, in general, if you were to like go back and look at it from the above view of that, like that we at all have to offer a reward money to get a human back to us is really a very sad state of affairs of humanity.
Yeah. In 1995, Judy put a letter into the Interior News. So, quote, my name is Judy Nickel, now Maggie, and it's well known my youngest daughter, Delphine Nickel, went missing 5 years ago this month. It is very distressing to see all the efforts that the community has put forth on behalf of the family of Ramona Wilson to raise funds, etc., especially since nothing was done in efforts to find or look for my daughter. It seems that everything possible was done to find Ramona, and I don't begrudge her family that, but I do feel as if I am a different class of citizen since I have begged, written letters, made telephone calls, and tried miscellaneous avenues to get help in looking for Delphine. But I have always met with a brick wall. Why? Does no one care about my child? My heart is broken and grieving, and it's hard to sit by and see nothing or no help. Financially, I have nothing left. Emotionally, I'm drained. Physically, I'm ill. Can no one help? Please, I love my girl too. End quote.
Oh.
So after writing this, Judy passed away.
Mm.
I know.
I like you can hear it in those words. It's like
Hmm.
desperation.
Hmm. In the spring of 1995, two teens were four-wheeling off Yelich Road, and they managed to get themselves stuck. They went looking for some help to pry them out of the mud, and then they found a body, which again was confirmed through dental records to be Ramona.
Ugh.
The second week of June 1995, Matilda led the Ramona Wilson Memorial Walk down Highway 16 to Yelich Road, making it an annual tradition.
But that's a pretty incredible event.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things I would love to take part in, but I just don't, that's a long way away.
I know people in Seattle, we could make a half-day trip of it and then go
Yeah.
again.
Roxanne Thiera was born in Manitoba and had an unstable childhood. Not bad, but she moved between houses, a family, and a foster parent. She began to struggle as a teen and around 12 was sent to youth detention center in Prince George. So this youth detention center actually has a lot of the women in this story. And Crystal, the one friend, Crystal's white. But she actually befriends, I think, 3 of these girls that end up all going missing,
Oh,
gets questions, and she's like, honestly, I wish it was me because more attention would have gone to
oh,
it if it would have been me that got picked up
right,
rather than she's like, these are 3 of my friends and I want them back. But they found each other through kind of the detention center before
right.
they kind of got their life turned around.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
3 of your friends go missing.
Yeah. Again, small town.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about a big area here.
It's so shot. Like, if this was happening to white girls,
Mm-hmm.
I can't even imagine. Like,
The
the
outcry.
president would be, like, trying to have to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Like, this would not just be a national news thing. It would be world news. Like, if this was happening on the same level.
Yeah. I mean, their equivalent of a president. They don't have a president.
I mean, like,
I know if it was in the
yeah,
US.
right. Yeah.
My
Their
brain.
prime
There
minister.
you go. My
Yeah,
brain broke when I was like, that's not, they don't have a president.
right. Their prime minister.
There you go. I know. I think most of the time we think about the US, but this is all Canada
Right.
that
It
we're
is
talking
Canada.
about.
Our
Yeah.
friendly neighbors to the north.
To the north. Um, Roxanne got into cocaine and by 1993 was rarely home. Instead, she stayed often near Williams Lake. Then the streets of Prince George in 1994. In June, she said she was going to enter a drug treatment program. And still, she was there a few months when she went missing. She left her home in Quesnel. I hope that's how you say it. Some of these names are hard. We know I can't say names.
Yeah, they're like French.
I apologize in advance.
Yeah.
On June 27th, to get her things, she left home to get her things in Prince George and to start her new life, stating that she'd return in a day. She did not return, and this was about a month after Ramona went missing.
Mm.
She was 15 years old.
Oh my gosh.
She was found on August 17th, 1994, near the highway, again, Highway 16, just outside Barnes Lake, and her funeral was on December 8th, 1994.
Do they have any like cause of death for her
Most of
or
these, because of um, like the decay and things that have happened, they usually don't have cause of death.
mm,
There are a couple cases that do get solved many, many years later by forensics and things like that.
right.
But I don't have that in this case.
I was just hoping, like, not hoping, but like that you could see like a blunt force trauma or something along those lines. So there's no way you could say, oh, it's a drug overdose.
Yeah,
Like,
she just fell in the ditch,
right,
and
right.
yeah, I know what you're saying. The next day, Alicia Germain, known as Leah, went missing. She was born in Prince George. Alicia had been in Prince George Youth Center at 12 as well.
Oh,
She was independent and didn't go well into group homes or foster care and ended up on the street, though she made plans to return to high school and get back on track. On December 9th, 1994, there was an annual Christmas party for street kids at the Native Friendship Center in Prince George. About 150 young people attended this, and now 15-year-old Alicia was among them. At one point in the evening, she told a youth worker that she was stepping out for a moment with her cousin, but she never returned. She was found later the same night, stabbed to death near a field by an elementary school that had been shut down, the Haldy Road Elementary School.
holy
So, like,
cow.
another group of teens walked by and was like, "Oh, what is this?" and found her.
God, that'd be so scary.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be so scary. I like you would feel like that detention center is like cursed. Like you would be so bummed that you are gonna be getting place there.
Well, I mean, this is 3 stories out of how many hundreds or
Right.
thousands of kids that went
I
through
mean,
there.
throughout that, it was so within this condensed time frame, though, that I think
Mhm.
it'd be really hard to ignore.
Well, everybody's ignoring them,
I know.
so
I know.
would it be that
I
hard?
guess guess, you just gotta take some classes with the
Yeah. I am much more pessimistic than
yeah,
you.
yeah.
In October 1995, 19-year-old Lena Derrick was last seen climbing into the backseat of a blue car in the Terrace, 600 kilometers northwest of Prince George. Lena was raised by her mother until she was around 5 when Lena's mother, Marge, met a man named Darvin. The family moved into his home that had no telephone, so they were
Mm,
way, way out in
yeah,
the sticks. Lena was said to prefer the outdoors. The love grew into a passion, and in 1995, she was accepted into a forestry program at Northwest Community College. She attended school in Houston, 3 hours away from Terrace. So, not Texas, we're still in Canada.
mhm,
Often coming home on the weekends. Such was the case on October 6th. Lena met up with a half sister, Clarice, late in the evening getting money she had asked Clarice to hold. The next day, Darwin and Marge saw Elena's bag at home, but she wasn't there. They thought maybe she stayed with friends, you know. They're
right.
like, well, she's young. She probably just dropped her bags at home and then went to hang
Ran
out.
off, yeah.
But on Monday, she hadn't come back to get her things. And on Tuesday, she was not back in school. And so parents were like, nope, that's it. Immediately, they're calling police.
Yeah.
Of the response from police, family says, quote, the initial police response was very slow, almost non-existent, end quote. So again, they're not
Right.
moving.
They're not doing anything.
They even suggested she was out with a man or on a bender,
That's insane.
though she had no history of acting in such a way.
That's insane. I would punch that police officer in their face if they said that to me about my daughter.
Yeah. Well, that family had a little more decorum and they did not.
I wouldn't.
I don't think I would either, honestly. If
That's
somebody suggested that one of my children, oh, they're out on a bender,
like
they've never
s-
done drugs. What are you
like
talking
yeah,
about?
like all of you just all of a sudden know that that's what they are going to do? Like
Yeah,
what is wrong with you?
I know. I
Go
can't.
find my child and quit making up stupid theories about her
Yeah.
newfound drug use.
Yeah.
Like
Like, do your job. Go do your job. Once again, it was left to the family to search. Marge's family came down along with other friends, and they looked through the rainforest along the highway, went up logging roads, and searched pretty much anywhere a vehicle could go.
yeah, I mean, that's another aspect of this is like the landscape in which these girls are going missing is just, it's impossible to like navigate. It's lush. It's
Yeah.
like the terrain is rough. It's
hmm
not an easy place to find someone.
Oh, yeah. And they actually, because I did watch a documentary about some of this as well. And one of the guys was talking about for every mile of like paved road, there was something like 10 miles of gravel road and logging roads
Oh,
that would accompany it, like offshoots of it that they would have to try and go look after,
easily.
which makes it near impossible to
Y-
impossible,
Yeah, it's
obviously.
even harder than a needle in a haystack. Like,
Mhm. By Friday, police finally decided to help, but it lasted for just a few days before they called it off. 11 days after Elena went missing, the Terrace Standard, the local paper, asked for assistance in searching for her. In early 1996, the police essentially considered the case to have gone cold.
that's
So they did like 2, 3 days of investigation and were like, well,
that's
sorry.
it.
Yeah, that's what they
We
got.
ran out of leads. It's like you interview everyone in the town.
hmm
How are you? How is this cold? There's hot bodies all around. Go
I,
find them and talk to them.
I know. On August 25th, 1989, sisters Claudia and Alberta Williams were working for their last day of the season at a fish cannery, Packers Plant in Prince Rupert, planning on returning to Vancouver days later. Both girls were from the area but had moved into the larger city of Vancouver to continue their education. In 1989, Alberta was 24 years old and celebrated her last night of work at Bogey's Cabaret.
Mm,
Her sister showed up later in the evening, and together the two shut down the bar. As they were leaving, Alberta wanted Claudia to go to a house party, And Claudia, it sounds like they were walking together, and her ex came up and, wanted to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And she turned around basically to be like, no,
Right.
like, get away from me. And I guess by the time she turned back when they were done, like, everybody had just sort of kept walking. And so they were gone. Like, the group was gone. She's like, what? What? And
Right.
so she said that she kind of waited for a little while to see if her sister would notice. And I think she said about a half an hour is what she thought that she was standing there. And then she decided to go home, where she was like, well, clearly she's out.
Oh, God.
The next morning raised little alarm, but by afternoon, family started to get worried. And on Sunday, the family went to the police and filed a missing persons report for Alberta. Corporal Gary went out after getting handed the report from the intake officer and started interviewing staff, family, and friends. Family started searching Saturday night and didn't stop until she was found. On September 25th, a group of hikers spotted something amiss near the side of the highway. Not sure what it was, they called it in to report as a possible body. And I guess they were like literally just walking and they're like, oh, that kind of, but it was like way down.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, we're not like,
Right.
that's kind of far away.
Right.
We're not sure what it is. We don't want to get that close if it is a body. So they just called it in and they were like, we don't even know if it actually is a
Right.
person, but I feel like we need to report this,
Right. We
which
have
is,
that feeling.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even when police first got there, they weren't really sure and they had to get up close. And Alberta was found on an access road
Ugh.
for a railway ditch. In a ditch, the railway ties, rubble, and weeds were kind of obstructing the view of her from like the regular road. So the
Mhm.
only reason she was found was
Because of
hikers
those
offer
hikers.
it. Again, making it a miracle, hikers even saw her.
I know they're like the only chance anyone ever has to be found out in that wilderness, I feel like.
Yeah, hikers and four-wheelers, I feel like, are a
Yeah.
common theme of
Yeah.
a lot of the things.
Maybe like some potentially Forest Service,
Potentially,
like the
yeah.
timber crew who's out
Or
there, but they're hikers. They're hikers being paid basically,
yeah,
like at that point. But
yeah. Or like railway workers if they
right.
went to do something, but they'd have to be out there to do something with the railway to see her.
I know, and it's just that's such a small little chunk of railroad that they would
Mhm.
need to pass.
Yeah. Alberta was in just a blouse and bra, with obvious struggle evidence. Dental evidence confirmed it was her. As with all the cases before, this one eventually went cold. No murderer was ever found. But in this case, those that worked it didn't forget, and this case stuck with them even after being moved to different areas. In particular, Gary said that it followed him, and he ended up working in the North District Major Crimes Unit and dealt with just tons of murders after
Mhm.
this. As time ticked on, something needed to be done, and in 1997, the Mounties had planned to create a task force specifically to investigate the Highway of Tears, but they were told that they couldn't get a budget for it.
Oh my gosh.
hmm While other women went missing in this time continuing forward, it wasn't until a non Indigenous teen went missing that general knowledge of all the missing women was broadcast. The people picked up on the more than 30 cases of missing or murdered women along the highway.
Wow. 30 cases.
hmm
Also, it gives me a little bit of hope because I mean, it sucks. And I feel bad for whoever it was that like initiated because someone had to go to a superior and then their superior had to go to a superior, but someone had to at one point say, we need to investigate what's going on here. And there's like a little bit of hope that it got to the point that they said, we'll create a task force.
hmm
It sucks that it got squashed.
Yeah. Um, so I didn't really talk about Gary, um, the person that investigated the one,
Yeah.
but him and his partner sounded, the way in the book just sounded like they, saw this case and then started to see what was happening and were just, flabbergasted
Right.
as one should be.
Right.
Um, but really did actually take the effort to try. They weren't like, oh, she's probably just out. They actually went out and tried to investigate and tried to find these women. It wasn't just the half effort that
Right.
families had been getting before. Um, but he did sound amazing. And I was like, well, at least one family got somebody who would
Mhm.
listen, it just so few and far between.
I think it's just so sad. Like, I think about it again back to our profession. Like, you get hardened by a lot of the things you see day to day. Like,
You lose empathy.
you lose a lot of empathy and you lose a lot of like perspective too. Like,
Hmm.
there's stories that I'll come home and tell Scott, and his like jaw drops when I'm telling it. And I'm like, I'm not even at the part I wanted to tell you about.
Hmm.
And the part that I had said initially was like in one ear, out the other. I didn't even think about it, didn't even phase me.
Hmm.
So it's like there's that has to happen to police officers too, investigators who go, yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard it. I
Yeah.
know.
Oh, I bet it does.
Yeah.
It's probably the same old song and dance. We actually, at work yesterday, one of the nurses turned to me and she's like, I am struggling to have empathy for this patient. She's
Yeah.
like, I'm struggling. She's like, I think it was like a pain or some type of situation. And I don't think people realize that a lot of nurses work through a lot of things that would land people in the hospital and we just
Right.
deal with it. And so
Right.
to have somebody complain when you're already in that amount of pain, you're just like, oh, I'm done with this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and she just turned, she's like, I need to talk this out. She's like, I'm just struggling today. She's like, I'm really trying. She's like, but I'm not doing it. She's like, I know I'm not. She's like, but I'm just so frustrated with her. She can do it and she
Right.
won't. And I'm like, oh no.
Right.
And I'm sure police feel the same way. Like, I get that conversation where they're like, oh my God, this again. And I'm sure
Yeah.
if they're
She
in
was
an
a troubled girl. Like,
yeah, and I'm sure if they happen to work 10 cases before that turn out to all be drug addicts that
right.
do run away, and then they
Exactly.
get the one that doesn't, they're like, well, they probably just ran away again. I get that, but we can't, you have to be like my coworker. Like, I'm struggling to empathize. Let's talk about this so I
Right.
can get it back.
Right.
Like, find somebody to talk
Yeah.
to bring it back then.
Or
Don't turn
even,
to families like that.
yeah. Or even like just by like having that conversation, you are initiating the fact that maybe someone else needs to talk to this person.
Yeah,
Like,
your
yeah,
biases
I'm
set in.
I've got some other stuff going on right now. I don't think I'm the appropriate person to try to go assess this person's pain.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
In the police realm, I don't think that that's um, something that they can do. A lot of times, especially in smaller areas, there's only so many of them.
right.
And if they get assigned to a case. That's theirs.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's slightly different, but I understand where you're coming from, where you're like, maybe you just
Yeah.
step back.
I think, and then that's what makes it so special when you hear like someone who's like heard the same case over and over and over again, who then still is like, this is a problem. Like,
Hmm.
let's like, and they just, instead of just being like, okay, well,
Yeah, here it
here's your
is.
Dilaudid, here's your oxy, like, and just like, whatever, I don't believe you, but here, take it.
Hmm.
Um, this guy like stands up and says, no, we got to do something about this.
Yeah,
Like, which is always pretty cool.
yeah. In September of 2005, a group of 70 gathered in marched communities along the Highway 16. They rallied and held, so a lot of the other communities did the same and they held their own marches. 4 days after the event, Tamara Chipman went missing. Tamara was born in Prince Rupert to Tom and Corey. It sounds like she had a close knit, loving family. Then, when she was young, the family moved to Terrace. At 19, she gave birth to her own child, Jaden, and then started kind of getting into the drug scene. Still, she managed to keep in contact with family fairly regularly and often traveled between Terrace and Prince Rupert. Her car broke down just prior to her disappearance, and she was last positively seen hitchhiking on September 21st, 2005, from Prince Rupert, heading towards Terrace. It took time to realize she was missing due to her nomadic life, but when Tom hadn't heard from her for a length of time on a fishing trip, he called friends and family confirming nobody had seen her, and then he went to the police. So Tom was like he's a fisherman, and so
Hmm.
he'd be out for weeks at a time. But I guess she would always like call into because she was super worried about him on the
Right.
water. And so she would check in with him more often. And so when she didn't, he was like, this is not It's not
Something's
right.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then started calling to family and was like, well, have you seen her? Have you seen her? When nobody did, he's like, okay, like we're going to police right now.
Right.
As soon as he got back off the water is
Yeah.
what took the most amount of time and caused the most delay in this situation. While 10 officers worked the case, nothing came. The police and family scoured the area. They didn't stop searching until December's snow prevented them from continuing. So not only was,
Oh, right.
lots of snow, but they couldn't, there was no clues of anything because now you have fresh snow on top of anything to begin with.
Oh, yeah.
So they're like, well. And it also prevented getting into like the smaller roads and stuff, the trails that
You would
weren't going to
be,
be plowed.
yeah, you'd be cut off from 90% of every place you probably need to look.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Still, for years, they continued to look for her. Family hunted down every lead they could. Aaliyah Katrina Sarek Auger was next, born on December 30th, 1991, to mother Audrey. In total, Audrey had 8 children. They were fairly close knit, though Aaliyah's childhood sounded fairly turbulent. So, numerous times, Audrey would lose custody of her children due to like housing and other type of situations. But she always worked at getting them back. At one point, it sounded like she was, she had been with a boyfriend. The boyfriend was not a good person, so she left and ended up bouncing between hotel to hotel. And they still took her kids because there
Hmm.
was no stability for them. I was like, that's not fair.
It's not fair. And
Like it.
also, like, who's to determine stability?
I know.
Like, a traditional home growing up, like, you
Yeah.
got one house. Like, really, stability is emotional stability. So if you can
Hmm.
give that to your kids, then that's all that really should matter.
Yeah. But as a result, in this situation, Aaliyah had multiple instances of foster parents and even extended family that she stayed with, and they were not good
They
human
were all
beings.
awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So she had a history of being molested by them. This resulted in older brother Tim becoming the protective one in the family. I didn't see how much older he was than her and her younger sister, but he definitely was like the big brother.
Yeah.
When they were younger, in one of the places that they stayed, he would make sure his younger sisters went to bed and then pull a couch in front of their door and sleep on it.
Oh my
And
God.
his thought was like, if you want to get to my sisters, you have to get through me.
Your son would do that.
Yeah, he would. He's the younger one too, and
I
he would
know.
still be like, "Mm-mm."
He would do that 100%. He would probably sleep on like sort of the inside actually, so you would have to like actually go through him.
Mhm.
Like he'd surprise you.
Yeah.
You'd
That's
like open the door and he'd be like, nope.
that's why we call him our bear,
Yeah,
man. He
he's great.
just yeah. I know, he's protective
Yeah.
of yours. It's funny. Um, on February 2nd, 2006, Tim, sister Kylie, and Aaliyah went to the mall, and as they left, Aaliyah said goodbye before amending her statement and apologizing to her mother, telling her not to worry. So, according to Audrey, the family didn't say goodbye. That was a term used for when somebody crosses over,
Mm-hmm.
and which is a pretty ominous thing to say. And I
Right.
was like, oh, I don't like that at all. At the Pine Center Mall, they ran into a group of friends and decided to go out. Tim, however, like didn't want to join. He's like, "Oh,
Right.
I'm not in the mood for this." At some point in the evening, Kyla got separated from Aaliyah and around dawn returned to her own home, but Aaliyah never did. Audrey immediately went to police and, quote, "No Amber Alert was sounded, and they told me to come back in 78 hours," end quote.
78
I
hours.
know. It said 78, not 72, but yeah, 78 hours. Why? Delaying the missing persons report to February 6th, 4 days after she
God.
went missing.
It also like goes against everything, and maybe this is a Canada thing, but it goes against everything that I have heard of missing persons. Like give it 24 hours. Like when the police do like sort of push you off, right? Like
Yeah,
there's the sometimes the police are just like, let's go find her. But then sometimes they're like they
yeah.
say they're not missing until they've been gone for at least 24 hours unheard, like not heard from.
Yeah, which is a common myth. That's not actually true, and that's not even a standard. That's just what people like the police would say. And you can report a missing person anytime.
Right.
But yeah, I know historically they're
It's a
like, give it
bad
24 hours. I'm like, no, now we have shows, the first 48,
Right.
and where they say that those are like the most
The most
important hours,
important.
and you want us to waste half of it before I even report this to you?
Yeah,
How dumb are you?
I know.
Stop it.
That's a bad myth that needs to be cracked.
I know.
So,
I despise that. Yeah, I've heard another um podcast talk about that timeline, and it's retired police officers that are on it, and they're like, yeah, that's not a thing. I was like,
yeah.
oh, I thought it was.
I mean, I would have, as a layman, reported my child before the 24-hour mark, like there for sure. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be at home waiting like, okay, we can call them now. Like I
Yeah.
would call them the second I thought my
Yeah.
child was missing. But I always assumed that there would be no task force or anyone interested in like really looking into the case until that 24-hour mark.
Well, if they're any good at their job, then they will.
They would.
They would.
I would make them.
Yeah. I would at least sound the alarm.
If you
And
don't
then if
come
they aren't
here, I
coming,
will go there.
yeah, definitely. The family searched for Aaliyah. Her mother even carried food and clothes in case she found her hungry and cold. So she had like a
Hmm.
bag filled with stuff for her.
Hmm.
On February 7th, the Prince George Citizen ran a story on Audrey's plea to find her missing daughter. 3 days after that, the paper ran a follow-up story in which police confirmed Aaliyah was missing and that she was last seen on February 3rd, but didn't really add any substantial
Right.
information. They were like, yep, that's true. She was missing on this day. A day later, a driver noticed a body as they were driving along Highway 16 about 23 kilometers east of Prince George, and it took days for police to confirm anything through the use of Aaliyah's jewelry, actually. They had a necklace and they brought it to Audrey, who confirmed she gave it to her daughter. About her investigation, the police media spokesperson said, quote, "We were working under the assumption that she was staying with friends," end quote.
Mm.
If you're if a mother calls and says they're missing, they have called those friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, seriously?
They've called
That's what you're saying?
they've called every friend and
Everybody.
every friend of friends.
Yes, everybody. Everybody. Mm-mm.
And if you are working under the assumption that she's with friends, then you are wrong.
Yeah, or go to their house.
Right.
Like, that's part of the investigation. If you think that, then go there, and
Right.
then you're gonna find out that
She's
she's
not
not
there.
there.
Yeah.
It seems to go on like this. Missing women and a lack of investigation, or at least any recognition of seriousness of these events. These are just a few of the missing and murdered women. A few.
Oh, it's so sad.
In the years since, the numbers of women have grown. The First Nations have done much to bring about the knowledge of these crimes to get attention on the subject. There are marches and symposiums. According to historic mystics, quote, the British Columbia RCMP set up a project, EPANA, in 2005 under their Unsolved Homicide Unit for solving the Highway of Tears cases. The project received the name in reference to the Inuit word for the spirit goddess guiding souls in the afterlife, end quote.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm. Additionally, quote, upon its launch, Project EPANA was able to identify 9 victims missing or murdered along the Highway 16 between 1989 and 2006. The RCMP also included a violent crime linkage analysis system, which helped in identifying more victims, end quote. So the RCMP uses 3 criteria when reviewing the cases of missing and murdered women to determine whether they should be included in the Project EPAN investigation. So 1, the victim was involved in a high-risk activity that would expose them to danger, such as hitchhiking or being involved in street trade, such as sex work.
Mm-hmm.
2, the victim was last seen or their body was discovered within 1 mile of the British Columbia Highway 16. And then in 2007, this was broadened to include highways 97 and 5. And 3, they were female.
Mm.
RCMP finally released a policy on dealing with missing people in 2014, including risk assessments, intake reports, and a review to be done by a supervisor. So they have a process now when somebody says that their loved one is missing, that they don't just shirk it off, that they have
Right.
to go through this whole process, and then a supervisor looks at it. And
I wonder how much of a difference that's made.
I don't know. It didn't say. The same year, they released national statistics on missing and murdered Indigenous women. The operational overview reported 1,017 Indigenous women that were homicide victims between 1980 and 2012, though advocacy groups claim that the number that they have released is probably fairly low.
Oh, it's wildly low.
And yeah, and that, and a lot of, at the time, a lot of families said that they didn't even bother reporting their
Right.
missing to police because nothing would get done anyway.
Right.
So those can't be included in the statistics because they aren't known.
Yeah. That number, I can tell you right now, is nowhere near what it
No,
probably really
it's,
is.
yeah, and again, yeah, I can't.
But what can you do? Like but there's just no way.
No, there's no.
Does Canada have reservations?
I believe so.
They have like
I'm
reserved
not
land.
100%.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that, and
Yes,
I don't
yes, they do.
actually know, but I have like an understanding that because of when things also happen on like reservations, they have their own sort of police force.
They do.
So I think
I don't know if in Canada they have their own police force because a couple of these stories sounded like they came from Indigenous land, but then they never talk about a lot of the stories here they talk about tribal police and stuff, but they didn't ever mention that. So I don't know if they have their own police force or if
Mhm.
it falls under like the RCMP
Right.
there. So I'm not sure about that.
Because that I think would skew data too potentially. Um,
Oh, between different, because it would be between different agencies.
yeah, different
Yeah.
agencies, and then there's obviously a lack of trust between like the agencies on the reservations and the police who don't care.
Yeah. I was just going to say, of course there
Yeah.
is.
So there's why share information on something that we've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Like they're not going to do anything anyway.
right.
I don't think that there are because it doesn't sound like any of these families went to anybody but the RCMP. So
Right.
I feel like that was their first stop for a
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that is the first installment of probably many about what we're going to term
Oh,
probably the red hand because that's what they call it. Um, try and keep it kind of in the forefront. But again, I know this is a different type of episode. We're not talking about a specific killer, which is what we normally talk about as one specific person or a very specific, try to keep it more focused. But this is a broad topic that we're going to try and keep in the limelight.
I like broad.
Yeah.
My brain works with broad very
Yeah.
well.
It's a little overwhelming because it is such a big problem
Yeah.
that I'm like, I don't even know where to start. But I think that point is just to start and
Uh,
kind of keep, the view or keep attention on the subject.
yeah.
So,
Because I mean, that's the whole aspect of it is since there is so many places to start, it doesn't matter where you do.
yeah,
Like, if we're needed somewhere, we'll find it
yeah.
as you do the research for it. Yeah, it's a
I know, but
really,
I tend to go down the rabbit hole
I
and then
know.
it gets overwhelming and then I'm like, I don't know what to do.
I guess I'm a back and forther. I like broad. I start well in broad.
Yeah,
I'll help you. I'll help you go through this.
go through this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.